dark side of gaming ethics and mental health.
And I'm so thrilled to be here speaking after these sports, metaverse, Web3 panels because they were awesome. And I think just to give you kind of 4 fun facts about me and why I'm interested in this topic. So first of all, I used to be a health person for most of my life. So I know a lot about health and mental health. I then became a blockchain Web3 metaverse person. So I became really interested in gaming because that's where that takes you. And particularly when people are talking about mass adoption, gaming's actually going to be the pathway to mass adoption. And then 3, my son is a gamer. So I was one of those parents that worried so much about all sorts of things about his gaming. And then finally, mental health is a major issue to talk about because it's responsible for 20% of the global burden of disease. So let me try and bring some of this together in the presentation today. Once I can work out the technology. Can you put my presentation on, please? Okay, so while the presentation's loading up, I mean, one of the things, when I was a mother and my son was gaming, and he still games, I used to kind of worry, I used to worry about 2 things. One, I used to worry that he wasn't doing his schoolwork and he was playing games, and at that time I didn't think this was a useful occupation. And then I used to worry about his mental health. Now, is this an image that you've heard about? People talking about gaming and mental health. Look at this exhausted teenager who's been playing games for days, not eating, looks dishevelled, can't get off the computer. That is what we think about, and that is what we hear about in relation to gaming and mental health. But let's have a look at what some of the facts are about this. So first of all, we're in Asia, and it's fantastic, and I always love being back in the Philippines. And of the number of global gamers in the world, that's 3 billion, Asia has almost half of that. So gaming is an incredibly important activity in Asia, and that's more gamers here than in Europe, Latin America, and North America. So this is a topic that should be of great interest to you. So let's just start with what are the reasons that people give for why they play games. And if you're a gamer, I'm sure you know this. To unwind, to relax, to decompress, to fill in time while you're waiting for something, to just escape and be entertained. And in fact, gaming is the most popular form of human entertainment on the planet now. Maybe solving a problem, use your brain, just be comforted. So people play games for good reasons. And in fact, what the evidence is saying is that in most part, games have benefits for people. So stress release, combats isolation, and particularly during the pandemic, helps them face everyday challenges, boosts their creativity, helps them with problem solving, and enhance brain function. So we're finding that games have benefits, mostly having fun, but also some really important cognitive benefits as well. So we're seeing in people who play games improved problem-solving skills and creativity, better social connection through games, stress and anxiety relief, and in some cases, reduction in depression symptoms. So far from creating mental health problems, in some cases, it's actually helping people manage their mental health problems. And in addition to that, some of the other benefits of games include education benefits. So it's well known now, and it's been researched and written up, that game-based learning supports brain development and cognitive skills, improves memory, helps people multitask, helps them figure out how to socially interact in communities. And in those communities, it encourages pro-social behaviours. And games have actually been used in therapy, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while, and games in helping people with health communication. So some of the games that we find are really great for improving people's mood are things like Candy Crush, Angry Birds and Limbo. And these are games that when people play them, they kind of promote enjoyment and a flow state and their motivation. Other games like Max and the Magic Marker and Mind Light are being found to help people with anxiety. So when people feel anxiety, they play these games, can actually reduce their anxiety. One of the other incredibly positive benefits of games is when people play collaborative games as opposed to solo games. Because what the research is finding is that when people play collaborative games, it has positive effects on their social behaviour. It decreases aggression. It reduces some of the adverse effects of violent games. And this is really interesting, this next point, because I didn't realise it. But what the research is showing is that game context, as in collaborative gameplay, for example, is more important than game content. So shooter video games, for example, improve player capacity to think about objects in 3 dimensions. And strategic video games improve problem solving and school grades. And games give people practical tools for learning resilience and building emotional resilience, even if they are shooter types of games, which for many parents, that would come as a surprise to them. Now, the other kind of received wisdom is that games are socially isolating. Well, in fact, that's just not the case. So over 70% of gamers play with a friend. And games create virtual social communities where decisions need to be made quickly about who to trust and who needs to be the leader of the group, encouraging socialisation. And generally speaking, people who play cooperative video games are more likely to be helpful to others. So despite that first shot that I showed you of that exhausted kid lying on the table in front of his video game, in fact, what we're finding is that there are many positive mental health benefits from gaming. So, and this is, for those of you who know any of the games, I'm not going to read them out, but these are the types of games that have these positive effects, both on pro-social behaviours, the benefits of socialisation, cognitive improvements, improvements in goal setting and mood repair. And I always remember the Harvard Business Review actually wrote up how gaming is a better preparation for business than anything that you learn in school. And I've often reflected and laughed. My daughter actually used to work right at the beginning of their token sale for the first 3 years for EOS Block 1, and they raised $4.2 billion in their token sale, the biggest token sale ever. But what am I going to tell you about what I learned about EOS Block 1? The guys who started that up met playing World of Warcraft. That's how they got to know each other. That's how they ultimately had this idea and raised this massive amount of money in a token sale. So games are a pathway to a different kind of future, to economic opportunity, and also to positive mental health outcomes. Others include emotional regulation and anxiety reduction. But of course, it's not all a happy story. No one's saying that, like, games is this panacea that is going to solve everyone's problems and no one struggles with it. So one of the first issues, and you'd be aware of that, is that there's gaming content that really isn't appropriate for everyone, whether it's violence and gore or frightening and intense scenes, gambling, sex and nudity, profanity. And remember, these are things that are absolutely intensified in 3D settings and metaverse. So the fear and the extreme responses, particularly that children are going to have to games that are in 3D, are going to be exacerbated. One of the other issues that I think, and I'd be fascinated if anyone else thinks about this, I don't think that anyone's kind of worked out, particularly if you're thinking about parents and games, what gaming classification should look like. It needs to include things like playing time, game type? Is it a collaborative game? Is it a solo game? What are the incentives and rewards in the game? Is it something that encourages positive social aspects and communication? Is it team or solo? Does it have horrific content? There's something broader than the current classification systems that's needed for people, anyone in society, to really start to think about the appropriateness of these games, either for themselves or for their children. Because there are adverse effects in a certain proportion of the population from gaming. So this does include violence and aggressiveness, social isolation for those who are excessively gaming. And this is a point that I'd like to make to you, because we come on to internet gaming disorders, that a lot of these problems are in people who play excessive amounts of games, not people who game socially, game in moderation, but for people whose lives are consumed by playing games. So toxicity and sexual harassment in gaming communities, we've had a lot of examples of that. Sexism and sexual harassment in gaming contexts, and radicalisation and toxicity in gaming cultures. These are all things that happen, and these are all things that as a society have ethical implications for this industry, which I remind you again is nearly $400 billion industry that 3 billion people play. So these things actually matter. So WHO has actually classified now a new international classification of disorder called Internet Gaming Disorder. And this is where people who play excessive amounts of games suffer from withdrawal when they can't play games. They use videos as a form of escape from the real world. They lie to people about how much time they spent gaming. They put gaming ahead of all other activities. But it actually, the more they play, the more they need to play to get that same level of satisfaction. And they perform poorly at school and work, and often they have poor personal hygiene. So this now is in the International Classification of Disease as a WHO recognised and reported on disease. But one of the things that I thought was interesting to share with you, because I showed you that slide in the beginning, is we're thinking around 3 to 4% of people who play games actually have internet gaming disorder. So it's not something that's vast and widespread. It's something that's very worrying. It's something that's very unhealthy, but it doesn't affect the broad spectrum of gamers. So all of these things that I've been speaking about actually raise issues for us both as a gaming community, but also as a society. And some of those questions are ethical questions. So some of them, we were talking about avatars and we were in Sandbox, a few minutes ago. Should game avatars have human rights? If your avatar in a game is attacked or sexually assaulted, is there any right of recourse? What about data security, privacy and rights? And we've heard about that in several of the panels today. Who owns your data? Who has your data? What do they do with your data? How are consumers protected in gaming? Are they protected in gaming? And what about physical and mental health impacts? And I spoke about children in gaming, children in the metaverse. How do we protect them? How do we make sure that the content is suitable for them? How do we know who they're talking to? Are they talking to an adult? Are they talking to a child? Are they talking to a predator? How do we know that? So how do we take this incredible ecosystem that 3 billion people are entertained with and maximise the benefit and minimise the harms? And one of the things that we're going to need is some transparency in the game mechanics, because one of the game mechanics is this thing that makes people addicted, the addictiveness of the game mechanics. And we need to know about that, and we need to think about that. And we need to encourage game developers to also have some of these questions on their mind when they're developing games. And so that begs the question, how do we educate government? How do we educate parents? How do we educate ourselves about the suitability and the desirability of different games, both for ourselves, for our children, and for societies in general. These are not questions I have answers to. These are questions that I'm putting to you as members of this community. But let me end on this point, because I think this is really important. So we have games and you play them, but within those games is gamification. And gamification is going to be tremendously important for a lot of things that we do, including mental health, but also in education and in a whole lot of other sectors. So gamified interventions can improve mental health over time. We've seen longer positive effects for interventions for promoting mental wellness through gamification, larger effects on reducing anxiety symptoms for males. All the males in the room, remember that? And larger effects on reducing depressive symptoms in non-clinical samples. So actually gaming and mental health is something that has a lot of interest and attention from the healthcare community now. And indeed, I'm going to leave you with this thought. The World Health Organization has actually recognised it and said, how can gaming enhance mental health, equip healthcare professionals with innovative tools, and assist in individuals overcoming physical challenges? So their thinking is going there, is we have a series of platforms that connect 3 billion people who play games. How can we actually impact on these people to target a healthier billion people by 2023? This is the new frontier for health promotion. And if you take it out of mental health and you think about chronic disease and you think about obesity and you think about exercise and you think about nutrition, all of this can be gamified, but particularly with blockchain and Web3 and incentivization, there's massive opportunity for games and gamification to be of tremendous benefit for society outside of just having amazingly fun time. So thanks, that's it. Thank you very much for joining me.